Here we are.
Hello, everybody. Hi,
Hello.
Nicole.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi, it's the To Hell and Back podcast. And, here's the thing. Just a few minutes ago, I was talking to Nicole, and I didn't have my silver hat on, right? And then in the middle of it, she was saying to me that when we interact in the podcast, she needs to sometimes get in and say something when I'm talking, and she knows that's going to annoy me. And so what I did automatically at that moment was I put on the silver hat. And then I realized another function of the silver hat is like a heat shield. It's like a deflector. And so I'm figuring this out. So I just wanted to keep you updated to the purposes of this. And let me tell you why I need that with her. I was teaching a workshop in Maine. There were about 300 people there. Everyone was at the same level. It was like a gymnasium floor or something. So all these people are in rows in front of me. And I'm in the middle of teaching, and this woman comes up in front of me and stands in front of me. She's my helper. She was the media person from Seattle that was helping with the media from the sidelines. And she comes up and stands right in front of me, between me and the audience. And she says, "Charlie, do you want a Diet Coke?"
Oh.
And I said, Amanda, who I had just met that day, she was new. And Amanda, I'm in the middle of teaching right now. What are you doing? I don't want a Diet Coke right now. I'm in the middle of teaching. You're standing between me and the audience. What are you doing? And I got really...
drawing an analogy between me and Amanda with a Diet Coke?
No, it's just totally random thought,
Sounded like it's like, you annoy me when you interrupt me, and kind of like Amanda with the Diet Coke, just this random...
No, well, you're like a psychoanalyst putting these things together, It's
that was a big leap. That was a really big leap.
So I said, "Amanda, get away." And then she looked at me and she said, "Your fly is down." She did. Looked right at me. She says, "Your fly is down." I said, "Oh, I get it." And then I said, "Thank you." And then she walked back, and I had the Diet Coke there. So I'm standing there in front of the audience, and they're all out there. And I looked down and I noticed, indeed, my fly is down. And I thought, oh, shit, now what? And so then I said, by the way, everybody, I just want you to know what a really good teammate does in DBT. They rescue you from embarrassing situations. So Amanda just informed me that my fly is down, and that's why she brought me this Diet Coke, and I was really pissed off.
There, while you actually self-corrected and acted as your shield, but that's neither here nor there.
I didn't know if it was
in hand.
I didn't know what would be the most and least embarrassing move at that moment. So I said to them. And so then I said to the people you people in the front row, like, you didn't say anything. What kind of teammates are you? And then guess what? I'll just got to tell you one more part of this. This is not germane to today's podcast at all, but it's important in terms of our working relationship, because that was Amanda was interfering, and then I had to realize.
Best intentions.
So then I learned at the break of the workshop that Amanda had been sitting there on the sidelines watching the famous Charlie Swenson give a workshop and thinking, oh my God, his fly is down. What do I do? So she called the vice president of the company, the training company. His name was Helen Best. And she called Helen Best, who was in New Zealand at another workshop. Wow. I'm in Maine. She calls her, wakes her up and says, "Helen, I don't know what to do. Charlie's up there teaching and his fly is down." And Helen said, "Get a Diet Coke and walk up there and stand in front of him. He's going to be pissed off at you, but he's going to be grateful later." And anyway, just to tell you all that. So anyway, I'm telling you this because Nicole and I are still early in this process of learning to work together. And I'm like a big lecturer. I go on and on and on. I mean, I watched last week's podcast and I thought, Charlie, shut up. Let's interact. Give her some space. So I'm working on that. It's a work in progress. And so anyway, so I got to make room.
And I know that it's very important for me to be considerate and patient, and I'm very happy to do that. And today I'm going to really, really keep my mouth shut more than I did last week, at least in the beginning. So Charlie can feel.
You didn't talk that much. You didn't say that.
No, I didn't. But you felt like I did.
No,
so I'm going to let you get some mileage before I interject as mouthpiece for.
All right.
The lay people. Okay.
All right. Okay. So what are we talking about? We're talking about narcissism. And this is actually one podcast in several on this topic. We did one last week that was kind of a preliminary set of thoughts and discussion about it. Today is like a little more formal, like giving you the foundation of understanding ways to think about narcissism and also the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. And so, because this is a very controversial subject. It's been a controversial subject since about 1910, by the way, when Freud wrote it for the first time in one of his papers. And then he wrote a paper a little after that called On Narcissism. So it's been around, and he borrowed it from somebody who wrote it in 1898. And so that's when it was very first in the psychological literature at all. So, we're still
all the way back to the 1800s.
1800s.
We're really going to do a thorough lecture today, huh?
No, we're not. We're jumping.
I'm sorry, I just had to. Go ahead.
That's right. It's already so thorough that you better be taking notes. So Freud brought it up, and then it became controversial rather quickly about what exactly it meant even then. What we talk about as narcissism now bears only a faint resemblance to what he talked about. But and then in the 60s and 70s, it became incredibly controversial about what it was and how you treat it between two schools of thought that I mentioned last week, Kernberg and Kohut. And that was very interesting. That's when I started to get involved in psychology and psychiatry. And I was really interested in that debate. And then it keeps going. And I think one of the controversies now is just how do people use, once the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder came along in the beginning of 1980s, it's like ever since then, people have been saying, is this narcissistic? Is this narcissistic? Wait, what is narcissistic pathological? So let me say, first of all, and this is a repeat of something from last week that was maybe said a little more clearly. Narcissism is normal. Narcissism, as we understand it, basically means, how are you doing with your self-esteem? Are you having a good day where you're feeling like you're a strong person, you're confident, you feel secure in yourself, you got up on the right side of the bed, and you're feeling like, okay, I can do this, and you take a chance of doing something, like you put a stupid hat on if you're in public, or something like that, or you tell a dumb story. Where you just decide, you know what, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, I'm going to do this. That's healthy narcissism. That's like, okay, that's self-esteem. So I want you to be thinking, narcissism is something to do with self-esteem. And then problems with narcissism are sometimes problems with feeling like, no, I got up on the wrong side of the bed. I'm feeling very insecure. I'm feeling very vulnerable. I'm feeling like I'm going to make a lot of mistakes today. And if anybody says anything to me about me, I'm going to really be upset. It's going to really hurt my feelings. I'm going to feel rejected. And I'm walking around with already kind of a wound going on. So it's sort of like but a lot of the time, narcissism just means, how are you doing with your self-esteem? That's not a disorder. That's not pathology. You want an airline pilot who's flying you 30,000 feet in the air with 400 people in an airplane. You want them to have some narcissism because you want them to feel like, I can damn well do this. I can do this. I'm a powerful pilot. I know how to run this thing. I don't care if there's 400 people that are lives are depending on me. I'm the guy to do it. And you want people in battle to do that, right? And you want your accountant to do that. And you want people at the bank to do that. And you want your best friend to do that if they're doing a hard thing. So it's sort of like healthy narcissism is that sometimes you get a little inflated, but maybe not totally crazy. You're not psychotic, but you're feeling like, all right, I can do this. I can do this. I'm going to have a tough conversation with my boss about how I've been treated lately, and I've got to get my ego up. I got to get my self-esteem up so I can have this conversation. And then I have this conversation. And so narcissism is a good thing when it's good, and it's a vulnerability. Here's partly why it's controversial. People start thinking, they hear the word narcissism, and they think, oh, that's a bad thing. You don't want to be narcissistic. I mean, that just must mean you're selfish. That's a misunderstanding. I mean, narcissism is actually this thing that's related to having self-esteem. Think of it like this. Everyone in the country, everyone in the world probably has some degree of anxiety, right? Anxiety is normal. Anxiety can be helpful. Anxiety is just sort of like part of being a human being. An anxiety disorder is when it goes beyond a certain threshold and it's compromising your functioning. You can't see a person anymore because you have such severe social anxiety. That's a problem. Being nervous about seeing a person, anxiety, that's normal. Having some concerns about are you eating too much or eating too little, that's kind of normal. Beyond a certain threshold, it becomes an eating disorder where you're totally obsessed with it and it changes how you eat and it changes what you do. And now it's getting in the way of your life. That's a disorder, right? Attention. Everyone has problems with attention during the day. Like it comes and goes. It's stronger, it's weaker, right? Like self-esteem. And yet not everybody who has problems with attention has attentional disorder. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is when you go past a certain threshold of attentional problems. Now we're talking disorders. So to loop back, and I could say that about 5 or 6 more disorders. Loop back to this, narcissistic personality disorder is when there are some things going on with your self-esteem and how you're regulating your self-esteem that go past a certain threshold that gets you to the point where you're not functioning very well. You're turning off everybody around you, or you're always worried about what everyone thinks, and people have to be admiring you all the time. You stay very remote, or you take over situations, and then it works for the moment, but actually you alienate everyone around you. So narcissism, when you're overinflated or when you're underinflated, can be problematic. And the one people call narcissistic personality disorder is usually the one where you're overinflated. But I'll get to that because actually there's an underbelly where you're actually also underinflated, and it's back and forth. So anyway, that's just a beginning to get you in, because I want to talk about more things and what the disorder is. But, you know, in line with me trying to work with Nicole and make sure that I don't just like talk right over her.
You're going to give me some space. You're going to invite me into the conversation? Wow. I mean, amazing. Okay, so why don't I go in here? I guess a couple of the questions that were coming up as you were speaking that might be interesting. You know, looking at what was going on culturally in the 60s, late 70s, and into the 80s that really kind of brought in that shift in attention that, you know, where these different schools of thought were discussing narcissism and thinking about it. It was becoming maybe a topic of clinical interest. I know it was the age of Gordon Gekko, American Psycho, Wall Street, all of that. So there was certainly like a larger zeitgeist going on. And I think that there's something else going similar but different that's happening right now with technology and selfie culture. That might be something interesting to think about. And then just your thoughts about the myth of narcissists, and is that relevant to the way we talk about narcissism? This idea of falling in love with or being hypnotized by your own image, maybe to the point to which you're numbed by it, or you don't recognize it for what it is. That there's an illusion there that and how that might be relevant for for right now with, again, that selfie culture. And then last question I have I get is about like, self-interest and ambition versus kind of this fragility of self. Those are things that I think would be interesting to hear more about, the idea of a fragile ego that needs constant validation in order to function versus one which is maybe, at least sees itself as being grandiose, and uses grandiosity as an instrument or vehicle for excellence.
So some of this, yeah. I'm going to get to in just in the next couple minutes. So I'll just defer part of this. But Great. But the myth of Narcissus, I think what the current concept of narcissism has in common with that myth. I mean, the myth is that Narcissus looks into the water that's clear, still water, and sees his image in the water. And it's like, oh my God, it's all me. That's me. And then he wants to relate to his image, and he loves his image, and he's going to die going after his image and drown. I mean, so that's the kind of myth that it is. The way that's similar is that the grandiose version of narcissism and pathological narcissism has in it, it's kind of like the surface presentation is the world is made up of, me, and then me. And then there's me, right? Oh, is there you? Well, as long as you think I'm great, that yes, you're part of the world too. If you're not,
as an extension of you, which is
as an extension of me, yeah, it's sort of like, yes. And so in that sense, it's very much of a preoccupation with me, but it's also a reparative. For some people, it's a reparative preoccupation, and I'll get into the subtypes. But a very typical presentation would be, yeah, it's all about me, it's all about me, it's all about me, until someone comes along and says something critical of me that hurts me and that I feel might be accurate, and it blows my cover and it makes me feel devastated. And then I have to kind of re-erect who I am, because actually, even though I present as in power and in control and superior and all of this, there's another corner of me that's feeling rather vulnerable and inferior, or at least there's a history. The problem with that explanation, which is not an unusual explanation at all, if you read about or if you watch videos about narcissism, the problem with that is that there really are two subtypes of grandiose people in the narcissistic group. One actually is just what I'm talking about. They're the grandiose people who actually are also rather vulnerable. So they're sort of precarious in their position of being powerful and in charge and knowing everything, or being the most beautiful, or being the most talented. They actually are constantly in the back of their minds worried that the emperor has no clothes. And somebody's going to reveal that. And someone comes along and says something, and it's sort of like, can be kind of disturbing. So there's that version of pathological grandiosity. There's another version that, and by the way, I'll get back to what the features are of this, but that would be the grandiose subtype of pathological narcissism. There's a functional subtype of people that are pathologically grandiose, entitled, in control, thrusting themselves in every situation, denying that they ever missed out on anything, thinking that they're overestimating their talent, overestimating their influence, overestimating their ability. I mean, there's that, but they actually are really good, and they actually are pretty stable at that. They don't fall apart. They don't go in hospitals. They don't ask for treatment. They do not feel themselves very much to be inferior. It's sort of like a structure that came together as a personality that actually sort of holds together pretty well. And so there's a lot of people that run the world in tech companies, in politics, in the world, in governments, in business, that actually have a lot of this sort of pathological grandiosity. The only thing that makes it pathological, since they're highly functional, is the way that over time they wear out other people, and they start to really that sometimes becomes their downfall, is that they so believe in themselves and they so deny anything that's other than that. So there's two subtypes that are really pathological grandiose types of narcissism. And there's a third subtype, which is not those, and it's the one that's more vulnerable and hypervigilant, the person who's always saying, am I good enough? What do you think? How did I do? And they seem always anxious about whether they've been okay. But actually, when you get to know the person, you start to find that they actually have a kind of a hidden belief that they are great. But they also, it kind of lives in the same personality as the one who's always worried they're going to be discovered or turned over or be in competition with someone else and they're going to lose, or somebody's going to say the wrong thing, they're going to be hurt, and they have to get it repaired and repaired and repaired and reassure themselves that they are approved of. So there's the anxious, vulnerable, hypervigilant type of pathological grandiosity. They're the ones that are more likely to come for treatment or to ask for help. And then there's the really sort of more secure, functional type. And then there's the grandiose types that actually can be brought down in a moment by the wrong comment, like an insult or something. Yeah, so those are just a response to some of the things. I'm going to say more things that speak to your questions too.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Very considerate.
All right. So let me say next. There's certain points I wanted to make sure I got. So I've written them down on the napkin I got at the pizza place that I got my lunch. All right. So yes. All right. So what is the diagnosis? I want to go over, like, what are we talking about when we get to that, past that threshold, and we're talking about somebody with pathological narcissism, pathological because it's ruining their life. All right. But
quick interruption.
Go ahead.
Because you said with at least one of these expressions, the problem is the harm that it's causing to others, not necessarily to the person. So it's a relational problem. And I guess I'm curious about that. If I think that I'm right all the time, and yeah, I'm isolating others, I'm pissing other people off, but if I'm feeling good about it, why? I mean, it seems obvious maybe, but why does it matter if other people are harmed by my behavior?
Well, it becomes an interpersonal problem, which is part of why the diagnosis is there. Take an extreme version of that would be antisocial personality. Antisocial personality disorder, the person might feel like, I'm cool. I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, the world is my world anyway. I mean, if I want to do this, I can do this. If I want to do that, I can do that. So if you were going to then you couldn't diagnose that as a disorder because the person themselves is not disturbed by it. They're disturbed maybe because they end up in jail, or they're disturbed maybe just because they don't have anyone to rely on because they burnt everybody out. So I think it's, and it's of the three.
There's underpinning of interdependence here when we're of really kind of that part of what wellness is. I just don't think this is necessarily obvious on its face for people that aren't living in a clinical world. But it's not just about how you feel and live as an individual. It's actually about how you operate and function within society. I just want to kind of have you validate that.
Yes.
Again, I think it seems self-evident, but it's not necessarily when we're talking about it. It's like, oh, well, as long as you're functioning and doing everything you want until you hit this certain threshold, that's when it becomes a pathology.
Well, I see it in extremes, Nicole. If I'm seeing patients in my practice and I'm seeing somebody who tells me they've lost 3 consecutive jobs, they've been kicked out of 3 consecutive jobs, and I say, and how do you understand that? I said, I need a 4th one. No, I mean, like, what went wrong? Well, they're all assholes. They're all assholes. I mean, nobody wants, like, I have so much to offer. And so you have there somebody who doesn't personally perceive themselves as having a big problem, even though they recount to you they've lost 3 jobs in a row, they have a new job, they're unemployed, and they can't get a job. I mean, that person is in trouble interpersonally, or they're out of sync with the rest of the world to such a degree that it's thought of as a disorder, right?
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
So in individualistic cultures versus collective cultures, narcissism and what is narcissistic is probably expressed differently.
You know, I don't know enough about that. It totally seems obvious that that's true. And when I think about where I've taught around the world, if I go teach in Sweden, I've done a lot of training in Sweden. And one of the things I had to get used to in Sweden, people can understand me perfectly well. Right. They get the language. However, when I say, does anybody have any questions? No one ever raises their hand. And then I find out later they had a ton of questions. So what's the problem? They don't like to stand out.
Call attention.
They don't like to call attention to themselves by raising their hand. They think just Americans do that, you know, and Americans do that in spades. But they don't do that, you know. People in England do that, and they do it with a certain politeness, but an aggressive politeness. But Swedish people are like, nope. And so I had to learn when I teach there that every 20 minutes I stop teaching, let them talk to each other in Swedish, and then they ask questions, and it works perfectly well. But, you know, so I think in Sweden, I'd be interested. I know there's problems with narcissistic personality in Sweden, definitely. But I think it would be shaped differently, and it would be shaped differently in very collectivist cultures. I don't know. Interesting. I don't want to pretend I know the answer to this. I really don't, but it's interesting.
Okay. Zip. Go ahead.
So, okay. So what are the features? There's a ton of features of pathological narcissism. And I think if I talk about them, everyone listening will recognize some in their friends, their family members, themselves, someone they know of. So I just want to go over them and say a little about them. And I've categorized them to make them easier to sort of hang on to. The first set are the grandiose ones. Okay. So people with pathological narcissism often are identifiable because they think of themselves as very special. They present themselves as special. They present themselves as the best, as self-righteous, as the ones who know things, the ones who are not supposed to be questioned. Maybe you have a relative like that. You know, just, you know, they say something and no one's supposed to question it, and you can feel that. Otto Kernberg, when I was learning from Kernberg, he called people like this His Majesty the Baby. It's sort of like His Majesty the Baby is sitting in the high chair of the world, and it's sort of like somebody brings him peas, and he throws the peas on the floor. I don't want peas.
I had a boyfriend like that. Wow. Okay. Oh, yeah. His Majesty the Baby. That's great.
I know. It was good. His Majesty the Baby. I mean, it's pretty demeaning. I have some problems with those things because actually when you actually get to know the people, they're actually full people. But as a caricature, it's a helpful concept that it's somebody who's deciding, no, I don't want this, I do want that, I'll reject this, I'll take that, no, you don't anyway, there's that kind of thing. There's this sense of being arrogant and excessively entitled, and it's annoying to most people. And they can be aggressively that way. They can inflict themselves on people. You know, there's the quiet, grandiose narcissist that's sort of like in the closet, so to speak, with their narcissism. But then there's the aggressive, grandiose narcissists that are out there in your face telling you that they're right and you're wrong and it was stupid what you just said, and they'll use language like that. What are you, an idiot?
Yep.
Right? You can recognize this type. I mean,
I sure can.
And the aggressive ones, by the way, this is where Kernberg called them not only narcissistic or His Majesty the Baby or whatever it be, but also he called it malignant narcissism. If you have a self-structure that's sort of filled with narcissism, it's like into the world, you're projecting yourself as the powerful, all-good one against the enemies and against the neutral people. If you do it aggressively, he called it malignant narcissism, as opposed to the people who are narcissistic, but they mainly think that way, but they don't necessarily inflict themselves on other people. in the news in the past few years. I mean, all the people who were trying to diagnose Donald Trump, I mean, that became one of these sort of catchphrases from a lot of people, including George Conway in some of his comments and commentary, but even though he's not a psychologist, but was malignant narcissism. As I said in last week, it's very hard to diagnose somebody when you don't know them. I absolutely see the caricature, and Trump did fit this profile in many ways, like almost a caricature of it in some ways. But I would fall short of diagnosing him. The person who has aggressive narcissism, malignant narcissism, is inflicting themselves on other people. If in addition, they have no loyalty to anybody but themselves, they don't care about anybody but themselves, they don't care about the truth, they might have an antisocial personality disorder. And Kernberg, I thought very helpfully, would line up a spectrum and say there is such a thing as narcissism, then there's such a thing as pathological narcissism, and then there's a thing as malignant narcissism, and then there's a thing of antisocial personality, which is the worst. And it's sort of like a continuity between them. And at the other end of that spectrum, by the way, would be borderline personality disorder, who shared some characteristics but aren't as stable as the narcissistic person. Their structure is not as well preserved and maintained all the time. They're going back and forth and having a lot of painful emotions, good days, bad days, etc. So there's a spectrum I wanted to mention. So I've just mentioned the grandiose features. What's the next set of features that are always considered part of this diagnosis? And that is the constantly seeking admiration from others. And you would think if somebody truly believes that they are fully equipped, they wouldn't need approval from others. It's sort of like a paradox. So they're always looking for admiration. So they can't go a day or two or three without somebody saying, "You are great." And so sometimes they ask people to say those things, or they elicit those things. So it's very important to them. And that's where people come up with the concept narcissistic supplies, is that you keep needing to supply the person with the sense of you're an inflated person for a good reason, and we all think that you're great, etc. And so you seek out people that idealize you, and you collect them around you. They become your like inner circle, your cheerleading squad, like the loyalists and the ones that are willing to put aside reality and say, yes, you are great, because it means a lot to them to feel like they're with a great person who thinks they're great. And it becomes a mutual admiration society, almost a sort of a narcissistic entanglement of several people.
So just on that point, so when I've had conversations with people that believe they're in relationships with narcissistic others, and maybe my experience as well, this idea that, it's all an exaggerated delusion or fiction. Usually what I've understood is that there is a lot of talent, or kind of valid, whether it's charisma, or giftedness or something, so that when there is this kind of constellation or orbit around the narcissist creating this narcissistic supply, it's because there is something kind of awe-inspiring or excellent that exudes from the narcissist. So it doesn't feel like you're entirely buying into a delusion. You think that you're being a part of something quite extraordinary until you're on the receiving end of maybe the aggression or that other, the other side effects.
No, that's right. I think that's one of the puzzling things when you look from the outside in. Why are these people aggrandizing this other person when they actually don't do that in their normal lives and stuff? And I think that there often is in the pathological narcissist with this kind of feature of constantly needing admiration and being grandiose, is that there is a charisma often, or there is a talent. There's a particular way of doing things that actually people say, wow, and they're willing to go along with it because this person's amazing. I mean, if you read the biography of Steve Jobs, and I'm not saying that I'm not diagnosing him either. I never even saw him in person. But
Winston Churchill.
What?
Winston Churchill has a lot of narcissistic
Winston
characteristics.
Churchill has a lot of characteristics. But Steve Jobs, people would stick by this man, engineers who were brilliant, who would be chewed up by him. He would be angry at them, and he'd be lambasting them and threatening them and everything. They'd show up to work the next day. Why? And people interviewed them later and said, why did you stick with this guy? They'd say, because he was so exceptional. He was actually, brilliant. He was an asshole and he was exceptional, and I wanted to be part of the exceptional thing. So there are things like that that happen. And so, by the way, this feeling of the need for approval from other people can then also turn into paranoia if it's not coming, or if people start to turn. They're very nervous. The person in that position who's still depending on narcissistic supplies of admiration and approval from others, actually, if it stops coming in, they're looking out there like as if they have a kingdom, and they're in their castle, and it's quiet out there, and nobody is supporting them anymore, or they're worried about that. So they can become rather paranoid. What are people doing out there? Why is this person not praising me? Right? Can you still hear me, Nicole? Because there's an internet thing here where I'm not seeing you. Live video will return.
I see you. You're a little bit blurry. Can you hear me?
Okay. I hear you fine. But
okay, great.
Momentarily you can't see you.
Okay, so on that note, so with the paranoia, let's distinguish it from, what you were kind of explaining as healthy, normal, adaptive narcissism, where, let's say, I don't know, I've put a lot of time and effort into a project of some kind, and I'm wanting some degree maybe of validation for my efforts from people that I respect and admire, to know that, I've done a good job or whatever. And perhaps I shouldn't need that. Perhaps I should be able to be completely self-validating. But because, we're social species and we do look to others to say, what do you think? Whatever. If I find myself in an echo chamber, I'm going to freak out. I don't know that makes me a narcissist. So this paranoia, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, well, there's a spectrum here, I think, that you're defining. And I think that once you define any one part of this diagnosis, there'll be a spectrum of qualities. So I think that there's, at one level of this, it's kind of like, I'm in this project and I haven't gotten any feedback about it. What's going on? I don't want to go beg for it, but it'd be nice for somebody to say that I'm doing a good job, or that at least notice that I'm trying. And then you don't get that. I wouldn't call that paranoia. I would call that sort of still in the ordinary spectrum of trying to regulate your self-esteem and having anxiety and wondering. And I think, like you say, we're social species, and you put out and you don't get reinforcement for putting out. I think people all over the place start to think, hey, what the heck's going on? If it gets, though, to a level where you have a conviction, and then you can go check that out, you can find ways to figure that out. You can ask a colleague, you could send a message, you could say, hey, how am I doing? And that's like normal attempt to find out, how am I doing? Then you get to the point where the person just has a conviction. So-and-so hasn't contacted me in 5 days. They must hate me. They know they hate me. I must have done something terribly wrong.
I'm going to get fired. My whole life is over.
I'm going to get fired. Now, you get to that level and it's closer to a problem. Really straight paranoia is like there's no necessarily evidence at all that the person is going to fire you, doesn't like you, doesn't think you're doing a good job. They just haven't said anything for a while. And so it kind of like depends on how far, how your reality testing is. Usually paranoia, when it's significant, there's a breakdown in reality testing, and you're sort of thinking, there's not much evidence for what you're saying other than what's in your own mind. So I think there's a spectrum there, and even there you can recover from that. The paranoia by itself is not the defining feature of this disorder. So the next set of qualities come from the empathy. Usually most people who talk about the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder say there's 3 big categories of trouble. One is the grandiosity. One is the constant need for supplies or admiration or whatever. And the other is some sort of a deficit in empathy or an incapacity to really empathize with other people. So there tends to be with these people a coldness, a remoteness, a kind of, focused only on your own feelings. Somebody else says something and you just keep talking. You just keep going. It's sort of like somebody says something, you say, why are you talking? It's like, because I'm a human being also. And so there's a kind of like a as if you don't exist feeling, like if you're working with somebody or you're dealing with someone or you have a friend who's narcissistic or they're narcissistic right now and in a bad way, you feel like you don't exist in their universe. They're only in their own universe and you're just like you said earlier, an extension of your universe sometimes.
Sometimes.
So there's a problem with empathy. Now, that becomes important in one of the theories about this disorder because Kohut emphasized a lot that however the person looks with their grandiosity and their idealizing of themselves, their idealizing of certain other people, et cetera, it can be kind of problematic, that at the core, there's a problem of empathy. And it started somewhere early in life, when they themselves didn't receive much empathy, or in today's terms also much mentalization, a term we can get back to, but it's like nobody's really understanding them, paying attention to them, empathizing with them, validating them. And so then you start to have what's an empathic disruption in a caregiving relationship or a very important relationship. And now that person carries that into the world, and it keeps happening. And so they aren't very good at empathizing, and they aren't very good at getting empathy. They aren't very good at being in a two-person relationship at all. They're kind of like automatons. I mean, they're distant. They're autonomous. Right. The next set of qualities, and there's just, please, bear with me. If you're finding this interesting, that's fabulous. If you're not, I'm just so sorry. You should go get yourself a Diet Coke or pizza or something. All right. But there's a sensitivity to criticism so that even in spite of the fact that, oh, I'm grandiose, oh, I'm distant, oh, I'm remote, oh, I'm in charge of everything, oh, I've got lots of admiration, there's also this heightened sensitivity to being criticized by people. You should not receive criticism. It just does you in. It reveals to yourself that you feel ashamed of yourself. You feel inferior compared to the way you present yourself. And you kind of have a lot of envy, potentially. You look at other people and say, why am I not as good at them? But you're supposed to be so great. So there is this, and this is more or less true depending on which person it is. And the final set of characteristics have to do with the tendency to devalue other people. So even though you're relying on people for approval, there's other people out there that you just decide are not only irrelevant to your concerns and your life, but they're actually hostile, or they could be competitors, or they could do you in, or they could say something critical. And so you trash those people. I mean, sometimes it's stunning. I had a person who came into my office once, and the first session, within the first minute, he said, "Are you a doctor? Did you go to college? Are you kidding me? Look at your office. I mean, blah, 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 blah. I mean," says, I can't believe it. And I said, well, it's going to be tough, isn't it, getting help from somebody as dumb as me? And just sort of used that as my first intervention with that person. And then
dying to know how you managed to stay regulated.
Oh, my God. It was a long battle because it just kept coming. Wow. This was somebody with a lot of narcissistic features and very hostile in doing it, and also having a really bad life himself. So it made it he was not on top of the world he was in the bottom of the world, so to speak. So anyway, I wanted to say those things, and that's diagnosis. Those are the things within the DSM-5, the big book for categorizing disorders, mental disorders. I mean, narcissistic personality disorder, there's 9 features, and they're all within what I just covered. I tried to put them together in a way that's user-friendly for you, but they're just listed as 9 features, and you have to have 5 of them to be diagnosed. as narcissistic personality disorder. Though the movement in psychiatry has more and more been to shift towards not trying to categorize people as being inside a disorder, but in just to say, what level of narcissism does this person have? Like it's a dimensional approach instead of a categorical approach. I'm not going to say more about that. There's much more on that.
We talked about that at some point. That's very interesting. Looking at dimensions versus categories.
Yeah. So what are you saying about it?
No, I was saying that I think that that's a conversation worth having unto itself.
Yeah. I think it is.
Something that comes up often when people are talking about narcissism is this idea of gaslighting. That's a behavior that is a narcissistic behavior. And it reminds me of something you said where, you almost stop feeling like you really exist, or you start to doubt your own sanity when you're in relationship with a narcissist. Yeah. I'm wondering if there's validity to that, because that's, I think, part of the kind of pop cultural mythos.
Well, what I think is helpful about that, Nicole, is that I think if, let's say you form a relationship with somebody, it's just a friendship, a colleague, or a dating relationship. And it seems like a pretty normal person, and a likable person, a functional person and stuff. And you start to feel after a little while like you don't exist, or you're an idiot, or what's the matter with me, or why am I so unsatisfactory, or you start to get cues. And yet it isn't, this person is not going on like as if they would meet the criteria of pathological grandiose narcissism or anything. And yet it might be a clue that actually in their inner world, that you are a nothing, unless you're a perfect whatever you are. Like on the good days, you're everything they want. And then you spend 3 hours with them and they barely notice that you exist. All they do is talk about themselves. My wife used to say when she was in dating relationships, she said it was amazing to go out with certain guys and come away realizing that she just learned everything about their life and they don't know one thing about her life. And I think that can lead to, at first you think, okay, well, that's getting to know, I'm getting to know you, but actually it's a very distorted way of getting to know each other. And it's very one-sided. So the gaslighting can come in that context, that somebody is gaslighting you and they make comments to you as if you're stupid, or as if you're against them, or as if you're insulting, when actually you're just asking questions. And you start to realize, oh, they see me as an outsider and a potentially demeaned or dangerous outsider. And then you start to feel gaslighted by the person. I don't know if that's what you mean.
It makes me really curious, about the relationship between narcissism and shame. I think in terms of being in relationship with narcissists, or maybe, having narcissistic parents, or employers, or, where that sense of kind of chronic, getting it wrong, or somehow not being able to kind of figure out what that ground is. It's an interesting thing. I'm curious because it's come up in conversations just in anticipation of this podcast, where people would say, that sense of like, I can't do anything right. And I thought for, 10 years that I was just the shit of the earth. But then, once I got out of the relationship, I realized, Eureka,
I'm not so bad anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Other people think that I'm okay.
That I'm wonderful. Yeah. That I'm really competent, that I'm actually capable. Yeah, it was very interesting.
I think back on the concept when you and I were first talking quite some time ago, and we were talking a lot about radical okayishness. And it's kind of like the antidote to this feeling of being ashamed, and feeling that you are pervasively, there's something deeply flawed about you, which you can start to feel when you're with a narcissistic person too much. And even if you think you're seeing it, it still can get under your skin and start to make you feel that you are worthless. You are pointless. And then,
especially when you're talking about this more subtle expression of narcissism, and you mentioned, I think last time we spoke, this kind of vulnerable narcissism that is not as overt.
right.
And in the conversations that I had, where the person did not seem like a, maybe, I don't know, as characteristic of these more grandiose varieties or prototypes, but maybe, even more introverted or introspective, insecure even, but that the kind of long-term outcome of or net effect of the relationship was a sense of like, oh, I'm with this person who seems really insecure, but I feel like I'm always wrong. And that just seems very paradoxical and counterintuitive in terms of how I think of narcissism and how maybe we talk about it.
But I think that to feel that I'm always wrong or there's something very wrong with me is one understandable reaction to being with certain narcissist people who have pathological narcissism. And another reaction is I don't exist. There's the person who goes on and on and on, like I do, talking to you in this podcast, but you don't feel
to be rolling your eyes at me. At least you're not rolling your eyes and like sighing.
Right. No. And those that would take it even further. That's right. No, and I think what I'd like us to do in our next podcast is get into the impact of narcissism on our relationships with other people. Like, how do you recognize when you're in a relationship with narcissistic people, with pathological narcissism, and how can you protect yourself? And how can you interact with that person when you're starting to feel you're going down? Because sometimes you're down before you even realize that this is a pathological situation. The relationship is already terrible and you didn't even know it until you just feel like killing yourself. I mean, it's
right. And are certain people more prone to ending up in relationship with narcissists than others?
That's right. That's right. One other quality about narcissism I want to say, while I'm still talking about kind of the picture of narcissism, is, and it's highlighted by more recent psychoanalytic models of people who look at narcissism. There was the Kernberg and Kohut models, and both of those still exist, and they're out there, and you can go online and you can see videos about them, you can read papers about them, books about them. But there's another group of therapists, they're called, and sort of a later version of psychoanalytic therapists called intersubjective therapists, intersubjectivity and relational therapists. And these are both therapy models that emphasize a two-person psychology. It's not just that a baby grows up and comes into the world equipped with the following characteristics and then they run into trouble. It's that this person carries with them what it was like to be a twosome with their caregiver, with their mother, with their father, with somebody. It's sort of like, and that becomes profound. Like, what's it like? Is it a dominant thing? Is it one person is dominating the other one? Is it two people that are totally disconnected? Or is it two connected people that actually can sit together or hang out together, or when somebody's a baby or child, physically be together and just be playful and reciprocal and go back and forth and have a conversation and be able to just be with each other? Because that's often missing in the relationships with pathological narcissism, is that ability to just be with another person and be close and be intimate. And I don't even mean physically intimate, just be there and have conversations and say, and then be a little bit flexible and realize your feelings are going to be hurt sometimes and you want to recover from that and go back and forth. That sort of goes away when you're dealing with somebody with pathological narcissism. Either they are very hurt by what you've done and feel very wounded, or else they're very dominant and superior. But in either case, there's not that middle ground of playfulness and fun and intimacy and sharing and working out problems in a relationship. So that's another feature, I think, of narcissism. When you start to look at relationships that narcissists often have with other people, is it's missing that. And so when I do psychotherapy in my practice with people who have significant narcissistic disorders, often I find that the hard and lengthy work of therapy just includes doing a ton of that. Like they come in and I say, "That's a nice hat you're wearing." They say, "Well, why did you comment on my hat? I mean, do you not like it?" "No, actually, I don't know why you would have thought, why would I say that?" And then you get into it and it's not pleasant, but actually it's the beginning of actually having the kind of relationship you wish they had had as a child. like to be able to talk about stuff together. It's just missing. And so you sit there as if you're facing off with each other, and someone has to be dominant, and someone has to be in charge, and someone has to be the smart one, and someone's the dumb one. All of these dichotomies are very much there when you're working with narcissism. And what you want to do is break that down and be more dialectical and be more intimate.
Well, that was going to be my last point, was how your early work with Kernberg has shaped and informed your view of DBT and the work that you still do today. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, and it seems like it's very present.
It's very present. I mean, you wouldn't know that if you come to a workshop and I'm teaching about DBT because I'm talking about DBT. But in my actual work with people, it's a profound part of who I am and a profound part of the work I do. I mean, what Kernberg brought to treating people with narcissism that other people didn't bring with the same level of sophistication and force was the recognition of how much aggression can destroy a relationship, and how much aggression, because aggression is another thing. We're talking about narcissism, not aggression, but aggression is another thing that everybody has. So if you're not comfortable with your aggression, you think it's going to destroy or other people's, then you start to become embattled and you form a certain structure where there's a lot of aggression, but you're trying to keep it away from you. All the aggression's out there. You're all good. It's all bad out there. You're a victim. And so Kernberg had this way, and still has this way, of articulating things so that you can see that the way the person's functioning has within it almost like well-controlled, well-hidden, but still very present aggression. And most psychotherapists are not as comfortable as Kernberg and his group at just talking about aggression as a normal thing. And to normalize and say, well, I wonder if you wish I was dead. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to think that. You might not want to think that, but actually aggression's kind of normal. You might want to think I'm dead, want to be dead. Well, I have thought that before. And then they're trying to say, well, let's have you own your aggression instead of projecting your aggression on other people. And Kernberg's group did that better. I mean, I was in psychoanalytic training in a couple of different places, and I've studied a lot, and I've been with Linehan, who handles things very differently. But Kernberg, I had never met anybody who quite grasped how to put all that together. And
fascinating.
Isn't it?
That's fascinating. I mean, it reminds me, there's a Tibetan practice, Chud, where you kind of meet your demons and you almost become your demons, but there's this space of really, it's almost externalizing and being present with these disowned parts of yourself in a really like open, generous, spacious way. And that just sounds incredibly compelling and courageous. I think on both your part, you and the patient to just be willing to put out the thing that's so stigmatized most of the time, and own it, not freak out about it,
own
but to actually
own it, because that's at the core of Kernberg's model about severe personality disorder of narcissism, is this incapacity to own and recognize your own aggression. And so your aggression gets channeled in all kinds of ways other than just saying, I really want to hurt you. And then owning that and then handling that responsibly. I mean,
go scream into a pillow. Right.
Let me do some artwork where, like you see 5-year-olds go for a run, draw a picture, write a song, etc. Yeah. So I think that Kernberg brings that. The Cohutian people they bring the emphasis on the underpinnings of the problem, where people are suffering from lack of empathy from other people, and they've had empathic disruptions in their lives. So you want to go back and retrieve those, because before all of the aggression got going, or as part of it, you also just maybe had a child in many situations where they were just profoundly misunderstood. And then that person ends up troubled, but no one ever goes back and looks at underneath in the infrastructure
what is the need that they're trying to meet?
That's right. That's right. In very unskillful, distorted ways. Yeah. Hey, look, we're going to stop in just a minute because I'm seeing what time it is, but I didn't get to my song. So
Oh my gosh! Go sing. I'm
You got to finish with the song now. All right. I don't know. When I did one other song and I used my guitar, you couldn't hear anything with the guitar. So I actually don't know the best way to use the microphone for this. And I wrote this morning, so it needs a lot of work. I just thought I just like to do it anyway, just to break things up a little bit. So
we get the original. We get like the first release. So lucky.
So you tell me if you can hear first I'm going to just play a little bit, but then I'm going to sing. Right?
Yep.
Can you hear that all right?
Yep.
Oops. There's sound here. There, okay.
There we go.
I walk the plank. Is this a dream? I'm on a search for self-esteem. 1 minute up, 1 minute down. One option fly, the other drown. Don't know how this came to be. It's so rare to feel security. I find that in security dissolves in grandiosity. Turn the page. Grandiosity, I find, is anesthesia for the mind. I run like wind, like birds I fly. Look up, you'll see me in the sky. Oops. If I just sit and wait around, a million critics will shoot me down. How can it be that I so great can get filled up and then deflate? I keep my distance, yes I do, from you and you and you. I ache, I do, with emptiness. Outside I shine, inside a mess. Don't tell me someone's doing well. I will just hope they go to hell. Envy, shame, anger, greed. Just be myself, that's what I need. Envy, shame, anger, greed. Just be myself, that's my creed. There you are. To end the narcissistic whatever. It's good. That
was one of my favorites. That was a good one.
It needs a lot of
I thought that was
These go into the pile of songs that need work, but are fun to do anyway.
I loved it. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What a great,
Thank
yeah.
you. Gotta end somehow here. So look, next time I would like us to talk about narcissistically informed relationships and how to cope with them. And I think there's a lot to say. And I think that'll be a time of bringing in more DBT, because DBT doesn't have a model for understanding narcissism, but I think it has a ton to offer of how to protect yourself and how to cope with such relationships. So
bring some skills
all right.
in. That sounds great.
All right.
Thanks, Charlie.
Right. It's good to see you again. Adios, amiga.
Funny gaze.